Now, the other peoples surrounding the people of Israel could be enslaved, but only temporarily. And this is what you find, for example, in Deuteronomy 15, and there's a parallel passage earlier in Exodus 21. It talks about Hebrew slaves. Now, the things that people mistake about that is they think that Hebrew is synonymous with Israelite. It's not. Abraham was a Hebrew, so all of Abraham's descendants are Hebrews as well. That includes the Ishmaelites, the Edomites, and a whole bunch of nations that we would regard as Semitic peoples, including most of the Arabs.
So I immediately, I was busy writing a response to this video when I contacted you about it, because this part right here just kind of seemed off to me. Like it seemed to me like he was setting up some kind of apologetic here for, including foreigners as Israelites, or at least including people in the Israelite code for, indentured servants is kind of what it seems like he's setting up to me.
Yeah. So, okay, let me see if I can't sort of paint the background to the discussion. So in Exodus 21, starting in verse 2, you have a term that is introduced into the text, and it is an Eved Ivri. Eved means slave. Ivri is translated Hebrew, right? And the way that this word has been understood almost universally, and continues to be understood in these contexts, is what's called a gentilic. And what that means is that it's describing like a particular ethnic group, right? A classification of a group of people based on their ethnicity. So Hebrew would be like a group of people known as the Hebrews, as opposed to like a social class, right? These are people that it's like they're a type of poor or underprivileged or even enslaved group of people. They're more a social class under this understanding. Now, where did this debate come from? Good question. Thank you for asking, GE. No, I'm just kidding. So the word Ivri is Ayin Beit Resh in Hebrew, and it sounds an awful lot like this Akkadian word that we have that is Apiru or Habiru. And of course, Hebrew and Akkadian are both Semitic languages, and so very early on, after these Akkadian texts were discovered, particularly those from a place called Nuzi, this whole sort of firestorm went off about, oh well, gosh, these who are the Habiru? Well, they show up in a group of texts called the Amarna letters in the 14th century, and you have these Habiru that are like kind of brigands or like these sort of outlaws or sort of cast out of society, and they're off in the wilderness or off in the desert, sort of banding together, and but they're often like a poorer, landless group of people, sort of figuring out ways to make ends meet. And so they show up in texts as like outside forces that are causing problems for local kings, but they show up at the city of Nuzi in an interesting way in these documents that show that these Habiru or Apiru are coming in and as foreigners to Nuzi are coming into more wealthy landowners and saying, I will serve you as a slave until you die, the landowner. And then I will do your burial rites and all these other things. And then I will become adopted as your heir, and I will become heir to a an agreed upon amount of your estate. And so apiru, ivri, there was this like etymological possibility of a connection. And they said, oh, well, gosh, well, maybe since the habiru or the apiru are foreigners very often, that maybe the ivri or the Hebrews are also foreigners. And if that's the case, that the Hebrews are foreigners, well, then, gosh, now Leviticus 25, 44 to 46, now it's got a big contender, because the Hebrews in Exodus 21 and in Deuteronomy 15 are only allowed to be kept for 6 years and released in the seventh. So this is why this was like an important thing for this discussion. So a guy named Meredith Kline wrote 3 articles in the 50s and sort of laid this to rest, in my opinion. Now, of course, scholars have written on it more recently. The big debate today is not what these words mean in their context, particularly in Deuteronomy 15, the passage that he's talking about, but the etymological derivation, right? That's the thing that's sort of debated. So if you read Thomas Dozeman's commentary on Exodus, he'll be like, it's tantalizing to see a potential connection between the Habiru and the Ivri etymologically. Like, do these words actually relate to one another, right? Because not all words that sound the same are related, right? Obviously. But maybe there's a connection early on. This is where this word came from. But the question philologically, and this is what's so disappointing about this discussion, the question philologically about what a word means is not based on its etymology, right? And the easy example of that is the word gay, right? Gay doesn't mean happy anymore, even though it used to mean that, right? It now, it obviously means something very different. I think something much better. But the point is that you can't go, well, etymologically, right? Early on, this word had this meaning of this, therefore that's what it means. Instead, what we have to say is, how is it used in the sentence? How is it used in the paragraph? How is it used in the overall context, right? How are people using this term? So you don't go to, well, what did this word mean originally? If there even can, a connection be made there. I don't know if that was a real sentence there. Even if a connection could be made there. Instead, you have to say, what does it mean in this context? And so if I could just share my screen for a second, I wasn't going to do this, but I went through this morning and just listed out all of the uses of the term ivri in the Hebrew Bible. And don't worry, fellow viewer, dear viewer, I won't go through all of these. But like, I just, you can go to any like online Hebrew, Blue Letter Bible, whatever, and just search on this word ivri and just pull up these contexts. You can see it for yourself, right? They're used very consistently to talk about this people group that are the chosen people of God, and are often directly equated with Israelites or Jews. So, for example, throughout the Exodus narrative, notice when it talks about, the Pharaoh coming to the midwives and saying, "Drown the Hebrew boys," right? The boys. The Hebrew midwives say to the Pharaoh, "The Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women." Right? This is one of the Hebrew children. Miriam says, "Do you want me to go get one of the Hebrew mothers?" When Yahweh comes to Moses and Aaron and says, "Say to them, the God of the Hebrews." This isn't the God of all the foreigners, right? This is the God of this group of people that's enslaved in Egypt. But notice here in 1 Samuel, this is where they become very damning. You start to see in their interactions with the Philistines, 1 Samuel 14:11, "Behold, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves." So if you go back to 13:3 and 4, it talks about the Hebrews are the Israelites that under Saul had gone into hiding. And notice here also in 13:6, when the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were hard pressed, then the people hid themselves in caves and thickets and cliffs and cellars and pits. They're Israelites. And in 14:11, it says, behold, the Philistines say, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves. These are the Israelites, right? But I think the sort of the death knell here, and again, I won't like go into all of this stuff here. I mean, you have a verse here where the Philistines say, or the text says, the narrator says, no blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel. Why? For the Philistines had said, lest the Hebrews make swords and spears. Right? Why weren't there any swords and spears in Israel? No blacksmiths? Because they said, lest the Hebrews, that's who the people are that are living in Israel. But and then I'll shut up. But I want this point to be driven home. In Jeremiah 34:9, Jeremiah 34 is this passage that is pulling from the law in Deuteronomy 15. And it's talking about under Zedekiah how the people had not been during this famine or the siege, had not been releasing their slaves, their Israelite slaves. Notice what the text says in 34:9, that each man should set free his male slave or his male servant, and each man his female slave, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, so that no one should keep them, a Jew, his brother, in bondage. So it's not only now that they're being equated with their brother, which is a term that is used almost exclusively to talk about fellow Israelites, except in very rare cases. But it specifically then says a Jew, his brother, right? So anyway, this is why, and I'll stop. But this is why, you go pick up a commentary on the book of Deuteronomy, pick up 3 or 4, and just look at what they say about Deuteronomy. Now, there are other reasons that we can talk about here in a minute, why this is such a nonsensical argument in the context of Leviticus 25. But just to deal with this word Hebrew, ivri, the context tells you this is a term that is being used to describe the Israelites. And an example that I'll give, and then I'll be quiet, even though I keep saying that and I never do. John, tell me who an American is.
I would say that it's anybody that holds an American citizenship. Like,
what about somebody that lives in South America?
They could possibly be, I guess, an American if they are visiting. If they were born there, no, they're not American. They're South American.
But they're born in one of the Americas, John. And the word America applies to both South America and North America. So technically, right?
Actually,
notice how language no work that way, right?
Right.
And that's the thing that I think we need to make sure that we capture here. You don't go back to where does the word America come from, and could we no, it's what does the word mean in its context? How do people use it? And that is I think that's an example that sort of highlights how you do philology here, how you do lexicography on terms like this. Anyway, sorry, that was incredibly long-winded.
Yeah. So just to, I guess, make sure that I understand correctly, because this is one thing that I get a lot of shade for. It's in order to understand what an author means, like in this particular context, you have to understand how they're using the word, how this word is used in other portions, by the same author or by the same group and everything like that, in order to understand what is trying to be communicated by the passage. Would that be correct?
Bet.
Right?
I mean, there's an example. what is a bet? Well, a bet is when one places a wager. And so would we be able to like go back to the use of the word bet and thinking about, 21 and doubling down in order to get at the meaning of that word? No, right? I actually don't know exactly what it means in the way that I used it, but I know that it doesn't mean placing chips down, trying to get close to 21, right? It's
Right.
used differently. It's off the heezy, faux cheesy. All right,
Well,
I've expended all of my cool capital. My coolness capital is gone.
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone.
All your Gen Z language has been used. Well, I think the current usage of bet in that particular respect does go back to like betting. I mean, people don't associate it with that now, but it's kind of like, somebody makes a claim like, oh, you can't jump that. And it's like, oh, do you want to bet? Like, do you want to put money on whether or not I can make that jump? And I think that it kind of got assimilated into common language, just bet, as if to say, definitely, or, I believe in this so much that I would put money on it. I think.
See, but the thing is, I didn't you could not assign any of that betting language to the way that I just used it, even though that might be the case, even though it might be derived from that. Like this is an example of, even if that's the case, you cannot assign any of that intent to me at all. I'm using this in a way that's just like, yep, that is correct.
Casey said stupid. Not that you're stupid, Josh, but that the use of Gen Z language is stupid.
Tell Casey IDGAF.
she just shot a side eye over here. All right. I think we could get through a little bit more of Bergsman's argument here, but I'm glad that we were able to lay that down before, because that's one thing that I kind of came across and I was just like, that just does not sound right. Like, this seems like a dubious argument here. So I'm glad you were able to clear that up for me.